Oh, well, hello again. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and I'd like to welcome you back once more to the Invisible College, where at the moment we're discussing the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible. Before I go into that, I just want to make an announcement that I am actually planning to relaunch the society as such. I'm looking into how I can set up a website, mailing list, then you'll be able to join it, and we'll have private discussion groups and so on. I'm going to keep it free because I want this to be available for everyone that wants to get involved. But I will also set up a Patreon account, and I also have a PayPal account already, actually, so that if any of you want to help support this work, and it is a lot of work, I can tell you, and enable me to advance it further. Things like new equipment, new software, plans for things, and maybe even having some kind of conferences, either online or actually physical conferences when we don't all have to go around masked up like this. When we get back our freedom, well, perhaps we can see about doing things like that. Also, even maybe some foreign trips. Go to Egypt together. Wouldn't that be fun? Holy Land. Anyway, these are all sort of plans I have for the future. So keep looking in. And this present lecture, we're starting to get right into the nitty-gritty of the book of Revelation now. We're going to begin at the end of chapter 11. We've already done most of that chapter. And then we're going to into chapter 12, which is called The Woman in Labour. But before we deal with the actual woman in labour herself, let's go back to chapter 11 and finish off what it has to say there. So now then, get my right glasses on. There we are. Is that the right one? Yes. At the end of chapter 11 of the Revelation, the seventh angel blew his trumpet. This was to announce the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. Now, isn't that interesting? I was just listening to Handel's Messiah, where it was, it was going on the chorus, and he shall reign forever and ever. You know how it goes on and on and on. Well, it's kind of saying that here in the book of Revelation. I don't know if that's where he got it from, but it's right in there. Now then, book of chapter 11 finishes. It goes on to tell us that there is a heavenly Ark of the Covenant. If you don't know what that is, there it is on the right, as well as the physical one on earth that's been lost. Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the Ark of his covenant was seen within his temple, and there were flashes of lightning, loudnesses, peaks of thunder, and earthquakes, and heavy hail. So dramatic stuff going on in heaven. In this, you've got to remember always that this is a vision, and it's more like a dream than a sort of seeing the future kind of thing. St. John is having a vision which is meaningful in symbolic terms. So all the time we have to be remembering that and looking at these images and trying to interpret what the symbols are and what they mean. So he's seeing in heaven. And I don't suppose God has got a physical Ark of the Covenant sitting up there in heaven, but he's seeing this image that this is something that God himself has, as well as the one that used to be in Solomon's temple. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, the Ark of the Covenant was was is a box that contained the tablets of stone that Moses brought down from the mountain with him, and a few other things as well. And it kind of symbolizes the contract that the people of Israel made with God during the Exodus. When if you don't know what I'm talking about, you must read the early chapters of the Bible. You've got the book of Genesis, which takes you Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, Tower of Babel, and then the whole story about Abraham and his family, Isaac, Jacob and his sons, and then Joseph, and how Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers and taken to Egypt. He interprets the Pharaoh's dreams. The Pharaoh likes him very much. He ends up becoming vizier of Egypt. And then there's a big famine. The rest of the family come to Egypt looking for grain. Joseph is the second in command of Egypt by this time, and he's able to look after his family. So he's kind of a really important guy as well. But then Exodus begins. Things have gone bad in Egypt for the family. Their numbers have increased. The Egyptians become jealous of them and they enslave them. So at the start of the book of Exodus, the Israelites, the people of descended from Jacob, who's also called Israel, they're slaves in Egypt. And Moses stirs things up. He decides he's going to get his people free. What God tells him, I think, to do that. And he performs various miracles, which bring punishments on the Egyptians until they will release them. And eventually they do. The people go. Egyptians come chasing after them. The Red Sea parts. The Israelites go across to the other side. Pharaoh and his chariots come chasing after. You must have seen the Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner. And then the flood comes back in. The Red Sea closes up. They all get drowned. And then the Israelites go on to Mount Sinai, and Moses ascends the mountain, and talks to God, who gives him or marks out with his finger of flame on a couple of tablets of stone and gives those to Moses to take back. These are the commandments of God, what the Israelites must do, and they have to agree a contract. A contract is a covenant. So if you get married to someone, for instance, you're making a covenant with them. It's not just a piece of paper, it's actually an oath that you're taking. That yes, you're going to be true to that one person, you're going to be with them for the rest of your life. That's an oath. And the Israelites similarly take an oath that they're going to live up to these Ten Commandments, they're not going to break them. And they sign it. And then these tablets are put in this box called the Ark of the Covenant, and they carry them around with them. Eventually it's put in the Temple of Solomon much later. And then eventually after that, I think we've covered some of it. Well, I've done it in the book of Daniel. The Babylonians invade Jerusalem and they carry off the Israelites. They take all the cups and the silver and the gold and everything they can find in the temple, but they don't take the Ark of the Covenant. That's already been smuggled away and hidden, and we don't know where it is, or do we? So that's seemingly the end of that. But we're being told here that God has not forgotten this. He's got one himself, a symbolic one perhaps, up in heaven somewhere. Maybe it's made of stars, I don't know. But that's what it's telling us here. Now, we move on from that to the chapter 12. And you'll see why I did the other bit first later on. Chapter 12. And that begins, and a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Right, so this is the story that we're now being told in the book of Revelation, and it's another mystery for us to solve. Who is the woman? Who is the dragon? So interpreting the true meaning of the prophecies given in chapter 12 of the Revelation is not easy. You might think it is, but it isn't. And this is especially true of the first section, which describes the travails of the woman giving birth and her conflict with the red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. Most people assume she symbolizes the Virgin Mary. She, of course, did give birth to the baby Jesus. That's the Virgin Mary. The Revelation and other prophecies in the Old Testament state specifically that the Messiah will rule the nations with a rod of iron. So there we are. If you're a Christian, you believe that Mary gave. Well, we know, in the Bible. If you don't believe this, why bother? Mary gave birth to a child called Jesus, who Christians accept as having been the Messiah, which means the anointed one. And the Jews were expecting a Messiah, one who was going to make things good for them. He was going to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and they were looking forward to this. They're expecting a nice, king to come along, who's going to sort out the Romans and any others that might be wanting to enslave them, and who's going to actually make them top dogs. That's kind of how people were thinking at the time Jesus came. What they hadn't done was read various other prophecies in the Psalms, in the book of Isaiah, in other places that talked about a suffering Messiah, and how he's going to get beaten black and blue, how he's going to be crucified. That is all in the Old Testament. It's not only in the New Testament. So if they'd realised that, they'd know that he was going to come here first, do all that punishment, taking the sins of the world on his shoulders, and then he was going to return to heaven. And that's kind of what it was saying here with the woman and the child, that the child was caught up to heaven, to God. So yes, it's understandable why people would think that this symbolizes Mary, Jesus' mother. But I'm not so sure of that, and I'm going to show you why in the course of this video. Now, the Madonna and child icon is probably the most common motif in Christian art. And this is hardly surprising, as the mother-child relationship is the closest bond that we as humans experience. Indeed, without mothers, there would be no human race. Yeah, we all, I know there are people who've had problems with their mother. They've been, thrown aside. They've had abusive mothers and so on. But for the majority of people, their mother is the great relationship, certainly of their childhood before they get married. Once you get married, of course, the wife becomes the most important relationship. But the mother who brings you up still remains your mum. And, you have a special relationship with her all of your life. So it's not surprising that this is the most popular icon in all of Christianity, the Madonna and child image. In fact, I was in Italy just a couple of years ago, and we were going around various churches and art galleries and so on, and we saw painting after painting after painting of Madonna and child. And in fact, we joked about it. That what the artist must say, I've got this idea, I want to paint a painting. What shall I paint? Oh, I know, I'll do something different. I'll do a Madonna and child. It seemed like that. It's everywhere. So that's not so surprising. But is it true? If we assume that the risen Mary is now Queen of Heaven as Catholics are taught. I was a Catholic and brought up as a Catholic. You're taught that Mary is now the Queen of Heaven. Then we can imagine her with a crown of 12 stars on her head. Well, that's not so difficult, is it? At first sight, this seems like a plausible explanation for these verses. The woman confronted by the dragon is the Virgin Mary. But is this interpretation correct? Let's dig deeper. Now, when we look closer, we see that the symbolic image of the crowned woman alludes to a number of different themes and ongoing stories contained in the Bible. It would not be correct to select any one of these and assume it was the definitive event or situation being referred to here. I'm being a little bit vague, but you'll understand why as we go on. There are many different interpretations of this passage. A good way of thinking of this is to see the passage as resembling a Russian doll. The outermost doll contains within her a sequence of smaller ones. Each is complete in itself, but together they make up the whole prophecy. So I'm sure you've all seen these Russian dolls. You pull them apart and there's another one inside. You take that out, open that out, oh, another one. Yeah, great fun. Probably for the first time anyway, when maybe you're 3 or 4. But there is a kind of symbolic meaning to this about the person within the person, within the person, within the person, within the person. And you can see the way that these dolls are scaled. Let's put that picture back on, you can see it. That there is some kind of symbolic meaning. There's even some geometry involved here. I don't know exactly what it is, but it could be worked out for how they construct these. So there is a kind of symbolic element here, and I want us to look at this story of the woman with 12 stars and see that there are different interpretations that take us down different scales, and we need to find what we think is really the appropriate scale that fits the whole story. That's the key to it. So we had this is shell number 1, I've called this. There was a thing in the papers, and I don't know who came up with this, can't remember now, but it was trumpeted across the papers that there's once in 7,000 years, on the 23rd of September 2017, we get the image in the sky of the Virgin Virgo. Yeah, well, that's a virgin, that's a woman, isn't it? And she's got 12 stars arranged above her head. They're actually in the constellation of Leo. And beneath her feet, or next to her foot anyway, is the moon. Wow. And the sun is at her shoulder. It's shining on. It seems to be the image presented in the book of Revelation. So this must be the answer to what's being talked about. So this rare configuration of the planet, sun, moon, in or around Virgo, was seen on the 23rd of September 2017. Well, it wasn't actually seen because the sun's there and you can't see anything except the sun when it's out in the sky. But if we include Mercury, Venus and Mars, there were 12 stars above the head of the constellation of Virgo, actually in Leo. And this was identified as her crown. The sun was by her shoulder. She's clothed in the sun, while the moon was indeed below her feet. So that was pretty conclusive stuff. And, you know, I actually do appreciate what this guy was doing when he worked this out, probably using sky glow, because I've done the same kind of things myself with Orion and the opening of the Stargate. And this is an interpretation. The trouble is that nothing really happened, and it didn't fit all of what we're told about this woman. We're told she's being chased by a dragon. We're told she's giving birth to a child who's going to rule the world with a rod of iron. Well, this might be a symbol of Virgo with 12 stars and the sun and moon, but the rest of the prophecy is not being fulfilled, so it's not a complete interpretation. I'm not dismissing it out of hand. I like the fact that he's worked this out, and it is pointing to something like we're approaching this time. This is coming along, guys. Get ready for it, because it's coming. but I don't believe it's the full interpretation. I think we need to go to more shells to find out. So shell number 2 brings us back to the image of Mary, the mother of Jesus, as the Queen of Heaven. We've already discussed this, so I'm not going to go into it any further. And then we have shell number 3. Is the woman symbolic of Eve, our first mother? Now just think about that. Adam and Eve, well, they're actually the parents of the entire human race, at least from a Bible point of view. I know anthropologists are probably digging up bones in Africa or Indonesia or somewhere and saying, no, this was the first woman. In the Bible, the first woman is Eve, the wife of Adam, and all of the human race descend from them. So we could say, in a sense, that she is our mother. So Jesus might have been born from Mary, but he's also a son of Eve, as we all are. So could this be the interpretation we're looking for? Well, there are some interesting things here. If the woman symbolic of Eve, our first mother, when she and Adam were cast out of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2, chapter 2, a prophecy was given concerning her progeny. It says, I, which is God, will put enmity between you, Satan the serpent, and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So this implies a future son of Eve trampling on Satan's head. And this also seems to allude to the idea of the moon below the woman's feet. So if we think of Jesus as being a son of Eve, because he was saying he will trample on your head, it's singular, third person, masculine. It's a guy, a man, or at least a boy, who's going to trample on the head of Satan. And Satan in turn is going to bruise his heel. Well, if you think about Jesus, he did trample on Satan with his crucifixion. If you're a Christian, you believe that the blood he shed on the cross for the atonement of the sins of mankind removed a curse that Satan had a hold on the human race with. It washed away the sins of the human race, and that is bruising the head of Satan. It's actually undoing the bad work that Satan did in the Garden of Eden when he tempted Adam and Eve to eat the fruit and therefore come under his power. So that is bruising the head of Satan. On the other hand, Jesus' heel was also hurt, bruised. He had a nail driven through his feet, and probably through his heels, in fact. I think they've, if you look at the Turin shroud, I believe the nails actually do go through the heel bone. So this is actually being literally carried out. So are we talking about Eve, the mother of the human race, the one who ate the fruit first, and now the sin of eating that fruit and getting Adam to eat the fruit is now being undone by the blood of Jesus on the cross and the redemption of mankind? You can see that this is a very deep interpretation. But again, we haven't got any sense of 12 stars round her head, any more than we had with Mary. So, yes, it is an explanation, but it doesn't actually go quite deep enough into what we want to be saying. But there is more to this. We can say in shell number 4, does the woman represent planet Earth? Could the 12 stars in her crown represent the 12 signs of the zodiac? Well, there's a thought. You see, you've got 12 stars and 12 signs of the zodiac. And the Earth, yes, I know Eve is the mother of the human race, but the Earth is the mother of us all. Everything. She's Mother Earth. So we could say that we're talking about Mother Earth with her 12 stars going round her head. And this again is a plausible explanation. The sun, our local star, is clearly the ruler of the solar system. As a planet that orbits the sun, the Earth is subordinate. The light from the sun robes the Earth and enables life to exist. So we've got another part of the prophecy, or the vision, being fulfilled. That yes, the Earth is robed in the sun. It's robed with sunlight. Furthermore, similarly, the Earth is superior to the moon, which is lifeless, yet orbits her. In this sense, the Earth is its mother too, and it sits below her feet. So symbolically, the moon sits below the feet of the Earth. But this goes even further than this. This idea is supported by the fact that the moon's orbit is symbolized as a dragon. I don't know if you know that the circle of the moon, it actually performs quite a complex movement around the Earth in relation to the sun and where the Earth is in different points of its sun. So it actually looks like a coiled serpent moving around. And sometimes the moon, full moons are higher and sometimes they're lower. And, it's quite complicated. But it boils down, in fact, to a single, the orbit of the moon around the Earth is not in the same plane as the orbit of the Earth around the sun. It's inclined. And you can see that here. And that orbit crosses over the sun, the orbit of the Earth around the sun, which we see as the ecliptic. We see it as the sun moving around us, but actually it's us going around the sun. But there are, times when the sun and moon are both on the ecliptic at the same time at the points of crossing. And when they're both at these 2 points, one's called the dragon's head and the other's called the dragon's tail. The caput draconis and cauda draconis, the tail. So we have the head of the dragon is 1 point on the ecliptic, and when the sun is positioned there and the moon is also positioned there, that's the times when we get a solar eclipse. And so you'll then see the moon going, black in front of the sun. It's bruised, but at the same time the sun is eclipsed. You can't see its light. So is that what it's talking about? Well, it's an interpretation, isn't it? That we're beginning to see that this idea of the Earth as being the woman in the sky with 12 stars around her head and this whole bruising of serpents and things, it could be referring to that. But there are other problems with that. One is this whole question of the child with the rod and the woman having to flee and the Earth helping her, which comes a bit later. So, the Earth can't, we can't really be talking about the woman and the Earth as one and the same, or the Earth wouldn't be helping the woman. You get my meaning. So I've said all this. At first sight, this is a good explanation, but it does not explain the woman going into labour and the dragon pursuing both her and her offspring. So I think we have to leave that interpretation and look for yet another one. As I said, these are all these shells within shells within shells give us different interpretations and different views on this prophecy as we begin to try to narrow down on what it's really all about. Now, we carry on with the chapter because that throws more light. So chapter 12 continues. Now war arose in heaven. Michael, that's the archangel Michael, and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, that's the dragon, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So that can't refer to the moon as the dragon in question. It looks like we need to be looking for another Russian doll to explain this. But we all, this is the story of the fall of Satan, cast down to earth. Michael and his angels have fought him and driven him out of heaven for his transgressions, particularly his pride. He thought he was going to be God. He wanted to be God. He's a very high angel. Much higher, much more intelligent than we are. This is the problem with the devil. This is the problem with Satan. People think, there's no such thing as Satan. It's just a thing to frighten the kids with. No, it's a powerful entity. It's not a physical entity like you and I, but it's a very powerful entity. And his biggest trick is getting you to believe he doesn't exist. If you've had any experience with him, you would know that I'm telling you the truth. There is a devil. And one of the problems with dealing with the devil is he's a habitual liar. And he will sell you anything to get you into his power. He'll lie, he'll pretend to be God, he'll pretend to be Jesus Christ, he'll pretend to be Krishna, he'll pretend to be the Buddha, he'll do anything he can think of that will get you to adore him and to take him as your master. This is what the devil does, and you need to be on your guard. So I would really advise anyone who's studying this book to ask for protection from Jesus Christ and God as you begin to probe these mysteries, because there's a bad guy out there, and he's going to want to twist things and get you to trip up. So anyway, let's get back to this. So it can't refer to the moon. Now the passage goes on. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. That's Jesus. We've come across this whole connection between crucifixion and the sacrificial lamb right at the beginning of the Revelation. And the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. So that's talking about the martyrs and the martyrs under the altar. We talked about that in an earlier lecture. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows his time is short. Okay, so we're faced with this situation that the devil's been cast down to earth. He knows that he's on a losing wicket. He knows he hasn't got a chance. He's just got a bit of time to play with. And he's going to make the best of it. He's really angry, and he's going to make the best of it. And the best way that he can make the best of it is to try to destroy as much as he can and to pull as many people down with him as he can. So let's go to shell number 5. And the story now returns to tell us more about the fate of the woman with the starry crown. Right? So we've got another image here, rather nice one. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. Now there's another very mysterious saying. So the dragon's going to be pursuing her, and she's going to be given the wings of an eagle to escape. And presumably this dragon, this serpent, he can't fly. He's got to crawl on his belly. And so she's able to get away from him. So who is this woman with the starry crown really meant to represent? And what is the great eagle whose wings she is given? Now I'm wondering how much I should tell you about this. This is a very deep insight that I've had into this. I'll take you some of the way, but I think I'm going to reserve part of this explanation, mainly because I want to put this on Google, and if I put everything that I know on Google, sorry, YouTube, I keep calling it Google, but Google owns YouTube, so it's the same company. They'll probably delete it. So I'm just going to go sort of part of the way into this, and I will do another lecture on this, which I shall put on Rumble, that you can go and have a look at there. Whoops, we've gone too far. Right. So shell number 5, there's only one answer to this. Although Mary was the actual mother of Jesus, as the mother of all mankind, and Eve too can be called the mother, but by the same token, Jesus was the son of the nation of Israel. In the Old Testament, she is described as God's bride, in just the same way that in the New Testament, the church is described as the bride of Christ. However, the church does not have 12 stars on its head, symbolic or otherwise, nor is it driven to exile by Satan. The real meaning of the woman with the 12 stars around her head must be the nation of Israel. Now, this needs a bit of explanation, because you probably think, well, what's this got to do with Israel? You know, we don't like the Israelis. You know, we much prefer the Palestinians. Some people probably think that. I'm actually very fond of the Israelis, and I've been to Israel quite a few times. I actually worked on a kibbutz at one point. But we need to distinguish between Israel and Israel. It is confusing, isn't it? It's a bit like, actually, we call the British, the English British, but they never were called British before. They were always called English before 1700. You probably didn't know that. The British were the Welsh. But now we call everyone who lives in the island of Britain British, at least if they've got passport. So the nation of Israel was not solely the Jews, though they were and are a very important part of it. There were originally 12 tribes of Israel descended from the 12 sons of Jacob. Now, these sons were called Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, that's the father of the Jews, or one of the fathers, Zebulon, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin. Benjamin is the other father of the Jews, but I'll come to that in a second. Although these 12 sons were born from 4 different women, together they formed one nation of Israel, and this nation was symbolically the mother of the sons of Israel. So I want you to understand that. The nation of Israel, the symbol for the nation of Israel is this woman, Israel, and she's mentioned like that in the Bible. And so she does have 12 stars, because you've got the 12 sons, her tribes, and she's the one that's being pursued by the devil. Now, at the time of the Exodus from Egypt, the 12 tribes were brought to the holy mountain. I've told you this at the beginning. Moses ascended the mountain to receive instructions directly from God. He brought down the 10 Commandments, carved on stone tablets. And the people of Israel, all 12 tribes, now notice that it's not just Judah, Benjamin, the Jews, it's all 12 swear an oath that they're going to keep to the commandments, the covenant, which is made with all of them. And you won't be surprised that actually the tribe of Joseph was the guy who saved them all. He was the favourite son of Jacob, Israel, sold into slavery by his brothers and taken to Egypt, and started off as a slave and ended up as the second most important man in the country, and saved his family. So you won't be surprised that Jacob was very, very pleased with him, and he actually, in the end of the book of Genesis, I think it's the last but one chapter, Jacob, who's by this time old and weary, and he knows he's going to die soon, he calls Joseph and says, "Bring your sons to me." Joseph married an Egyptian woman, the daughter of Potiphar, I think, who was the high priest. And so Jacob calls the two sons, and he has them brought to him, Ephraim and Manasseh, they are called. And Manasseh was the elder one, and Ephraim was the younger one. But when he gives his blessing to the boys, he swaps his hands over, and Joseph says, no, this is the older one. And he says, "I know what I'm doing." He puts the chief blessing on Ephraim, who's the younger son, and he also blesses the older one, Manasseh. And he tells Ephraim he's going to become a nation and a company of nations, and Manasseh that he'll become a great nation. So what's a special blessing on these two? Well, then, when we're at the Exodus, and Moses been up the mountain, he's got God's orders, he comes back down, tells them to build the Ark of the Covenant, and they're going to carry these stone tablets with them. I think these are replacement ones, because Moses threw the tablets down, when he saw that they were cooking up a golden calf and worshipping that, and he was furious. Maybe he picked up the pieces of the original tablets and put them in the ark. But anyway, so there were tablets in the ark, and then he set up a priesthood of muscle men. The third tribe, Levi, were sort of fighting men, and he put them in charge of carrying it and defending it against anyone who wanted to interfere with it. And the Levites therefore became priests. And to replace them as a land-holding tribe, he took the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim inherited the portion of Joseph, and he gave Manasseh, the people of Manasseh, the tribe of Manasseh, the portion that would have been belonging to Levi, because they're now priests, so they're not going to be doing that. So we still have 12 tribes, but we've now got the tribe of Ephraim and the tribe of Manasseh, two sons of Joseph, and they've got a double portion. So I'll put all that here, but we've done that. Now, the Old Testament is in many respects an unfolding tragedy. I don't know if you realise that, but it is. They get to Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel took over the Holy Land. That's it's mostly what we would now call Israel, but it's actually a bit bigger than that. It's got bits of Jordan in it, and I think maybe a bit more of Syria as well. And the 12 tribes of Israel took over the Holy Land, settling in different parts of it. This was a gradual process involving many battles. Eventually, around 1000 BC, they established a monarchy with Saul as the first king. They elected him as their king, and they were told off for doing so by the prophet Samuel. Anyway, but Saul turned out to be a bad one, and he was deposed by David. I'm not going to go into the story of David. You know about David and Goliath and all of that, and throwing the stone, and he was playing the harp for Saul, and there's all sorts of complications involved. But anyway, David ends up as the king, and he's the one that God wanted. So he ends up as king. But David's son Solomon broke the covenant by allowing idolatry. Now, Solomon was a bit of a lad. I mean, his father's chief sin was, he fancied this woman who was already married, Bathsheba, and she was married to a very loyal soldier of David's, and David, had sex with her while he was out fighting. Her husband was away fighting, and then to get rid of the husband, he asked his general to put him in the front line, and he got killed in battle, her husband. So then David was able to marry the guy's widow, which is pretty nasty thing to do. Solomon was their son by this woman. So, there's some nasty, let's call it karma, involved here. And Solomon turns out to be but he starts off good and wise, about judging the babies and all of that. And he gets incredibly rich. And he has hundreds of wives. And the Queen of Sheba comes up, from Ethiopia or somewhere. And they have sex and she goes home happy. But he starts following the idolatrous ways of all these wives of his and puts up shrines to idols. And God's really displeased by this. And he decides that come the end of his reign, he's going to let him stay on the throne while he's still alive for his father's sake. But once he's passed, he's going to divide the kingdom. And this is what he does. David's son Solomon broke the covenant by allowing idolatry. As punishment after him, the tribes divided and formed two kingdoms, Israel, which is 10 tribes in the north, and Judah, 2 tribes in the south. So this is what I was saying about the 2 tribes of Judah. The name Jew comes from Judean or Judah, the people of Judea. And that was one of the sons of Israel. And the youngest son was Benjamin, who's a brother of Joseph, by the way, both sons of Rachel. And Benjamin was put with Judah and actually the capital city, Jerusalem, was actually within the tribal lands of Benjamin. So that's just as well. The other bunch, the 10 tribes, were mostly in the north of Israel, north of Judea, as it's called, and they carried on being called Israel, although in the Bible you find them under several different names. They're either referred to as Israel or they're referred to as Ephraim, because Ephraim, the favourite son of Joseph, was their leading tribe, just as Judah was the leading tribe of Judea. Or they're called Samaria, because Samaria became their capital, city of Samaria. And if you read the book of Kings, you'll see there's actually 2 books of Kings. You'll see first that it gives a lot of history about this kingdom of Israel, which is the northern kingdom. And they even have wars with each other at one point, but mostly the northern kingdom has wars with Syria. And they go off the rails. So things went downhill from there for the 10 tribe Israel under a series of bad kings who engaged in idol worship. One of these was King Ahab, who had a wife called Jezebel at the time of the prophet Elijah, or Elijah. Jezebel was a really nasty piece of work. And she had lots of the prophets put to death, and she was all the time trying to destroy Elijah. But then he brought down fire from heaven. He had a bit of a competition with her priests. She had all these pagan witch doctors and magicians, and he challenged them to bring down fire from heaven to light a fire. And they couldn't do it, of course. So he had a big mound of fire with, to sacrifice cattle, I should say, to the gods, and they couldn't do it. So he had cattle put on his fire, and he had it doused with water. Then he prayed to God, and fire came down from heaven and consumed it. And after that, he ordered all the false magicians to be put to death. And he put a curse on Jezebel that she would die in the street, and her body would not be buried, she'd be eaten by dogs. And after he had already, he was one of the people who ascends to heaven. But after he had done that, after his time, she indeed was thrown out of a window and left unburied in the street, and the dogs ate her. One of the nasty stories in the Bible. But anyway, there were other kings. There was one called Omri, And you can, if you go to the British Museum, there's what's called the Black Obelisk, which was Assyrian, and it's got cuneiform carving. There's sort of little pictures carved in it, and there's one there of the Syrian king sitting there on his throne, and there's Omri bending right down. He's kneeling down in front of him, kissing the floor, to show subservience to Assyria. So, and they call the people of Omri, the Israelites, the Assyrians call them the Beth Cumri, the house of Cumri, of Omri. And that they become the Chimerians. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, so where were we? Digressed. So things went down the hill, and they were punished by God for their idolatry. And in 722 BC, the Assyrians invaded and transported them, along with many of the Judeans, out of the Holy Land. And they disappear from the history books as lost tribes. And you've heard this expression, the lost tribes of Israel. And two of the tribes, Judah, that's the ones in the south, lasted longer. However, they too sinned against the covenant. And in 604 BC, they began to be transported to Babylon. In 586 BC, the temple was looted and destroyed by the Babylonians. Some Jews escaped, going to Egypt, but the rest were deported. In 538, the Jews began to return to Jerusalem, eventually reforming a kingdom of the Jews. That was under the time of the Persians, of the Medo-Persians, and I've done all that under my lectures on Daniel, which you'll find. But then, in 70 AD, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, and the Jews became exiles among the nations. So you're familiar with the term wandering Jew. And that's because they were expelled out of Judea, and for a long time they were not allowed to return there. Centuries. And so they were wandering around, and they were always being persecuted wherever they went. And that's why in 1948, or after the Second World War, it was decided that they should be allowed to return back to the Holy Land. I think they're already going back there in numbers anyway, but especially after the awful events of the Holocaust, the conscience of the Allies was pricked, and they were allowed to return to make a home in the Holy Land. And the intention then, of course, was that they were going to live happily side by side with their Arab neighbours, but of course it didn't work out that way. As soon as they declared the kingdom of the nation of Israel, it's not a kingdom, it's a republic, the Arabs declared war on them, and they fought the first of several wars. But again, that's another story. A new Jewish state was founded in 1948. It now occupies most of the territory that once belonged to the old kingdom of David and Solomon. Yet the modern-day Israelis are drawn from only the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin, along with the Levites. Yeah, there are Levite priests mixed in with them as well. There are probably some of them also in the northern kingdom, but they weren't landholders, and so the two landholding tribes were Judah and Benjamin. And so they do not include descendants of the lost 10 tribes, at least not knowingly so, and not in numbers. So we can assume that maybe there are some people among the Israelis today and the Jews today who actually were descended from the other tribes. There might have been some people who moved to Judea, perhaps before the two kingdoms were taken away. We know that there were Jews among the 10 tribes who were taken away by the Assyrians, and some of them might have found their way back. Who knows? But on the whole, the lost 10 tribes remain lost, and I should tell you more about what's happened to them, what I believe has happened to them, in later lectures. However, the Bible prophesies that the other 10 tribes, whose identity has been hidden from history, will one day return too. The prophet Isaiah clearly states that God has not broken his covenant with all of Israel. And here you can read it in his own book. Thus says the Lord, where is your mother's, that's Israel's, certificate of divorce with which I sent her away? Or which of my creditors is it to whom I have sold you? Behold, for your iniquities you were sold, and for your transgressions your mother, Israel, was sent away. So it's clear from this, the woman with 12 stars symbolizes the full 12 tribes Israel. So for the prophecies in the Bible to come true, all 12 tribes have to be refound and have to have their place in the Holy Land. And moreover, the throne of Israel has to be re-established in Jerusalem. Because that's the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, is coming back, we're told. He's going to sit on his throne in Jerusalem, and he's going to judge all nations with a rod of iron. We're told that in the Bible. So if you'd say, well, the Bible's nonsense, I don't believe in it. Fair enough. Well, it's not really fair, it's very stupid. But if you believe in the Bible and you believe in Christianity, and the reason I believe in it is because there's been so many prophecies which have come true, which couldn't have been known by the people making those prophecies. For example, King David, one of his psalms, actually describes the crucifixion in detail. He was writing that probably about 950 BC, nearly 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus. So how could that happen? That's part of the Old Testament. It's an Old Testament prophecy. And there's many, many others. And there's others that we can see with our own eyes are coming true today. And that's why we're interested in the book of Revelation. And the only reason that we're able to start interpreting it in the way that I've been doing for you is because this is the time. We're told that it won't be understandable until the time. Well, if it's becoming understandable now, that's another symbol that this is the time of the prophecies are meant, that they were foretelling. So, as for the dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, it's a vision of successive empires and rulers. It harks back to the visionary image given in the book of Daniel for its succession of empires beginning with the Babylonian Empire. These empires were Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece and Rome. This last empire was to give birth to 10 successor kingdoms, which are represented by either the toes of a dream statue or horns. This is the figure from the book of Daniel that represents the Roman Empire with its 10 horns. So we can see there's a connection here between the Roman Empire and this dragon that is foretold in the book of Revelation. But that's another story I'm going to go into later. I won't go into those images here, as I've already discussed this at length in my series of lectures unraveling the book of Daniel. Now, at the moment, those lectures are still on YouTube, but I'm not going to leave them there. I've also put them on Rumble, and I want you to go to Rumble and join the channel there, because I'm going to put things there that I don't feel I can put on YouTube. And that's also going to be the home, at least the video home, of the Invisible College. So please go there. It's very easy to sign on at rumble.com. It's based in Canada, which I think is an advantage. And they don't do censorship, or at least they claim they don't. And we're allowed to put what we want there, as long as it's not pornography or extreme violence. That's what they say. Well, I don't deal in either of those, so there shouldn't be any problem there. But I've already put the lectures on Daniel there, and I've put a few of the others there, and I will transfer eventually all of these Revelation lectures there, because I feel that I want to put them somewhere more secure than on YouTube, which I don't trust. Yes, it's free, Yes, it's a nice platform to work with, but they have all sorts of nasty habits of reading other people's mailings and censoring ideas that they don't agree with, and that's not their job. They're supposed to be just a platform. So anyway, we'll go into further things about the dragon there, but I thought you might just like to know something here. The dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns has a slightly different meaning. The dragon himself is Satan, but his manifestation is a series of world empires who have in succession oppressed the people of Israel, who are the woman's offspring. And those empires are Egypt, well, you know about Pharaoh and the 10 Commandments and chasing them across the Red Sea and all of that. Assyria carried off most of them into slavery. Babylon burnt down the temple, took away the holy objects, didn't get the Ark of the Covenant because that was hidden, but they took away the silver and the gold and carried the people off to Babylon as slaves. Medo-Persia, who inherited the slavery, let the Jews, or at least some of them, go back home, but were constantly in history. Persia has tried to invade Israel and bring it back under its control. It's even trying that now. Greece, well, under Alexander the Great, the Persian Empire was defeated, the Greeks took control, and then the Jews, the lost tribes were already lost, they weren't there at the time, but the Greek follow-up kingdoms of the Ptolemaic Egypt, and also the Alexander, what's his name? Come out of my head. Anyway, the Syrians, Syrian Greeks, constantly invading down into Judea. Antiochus Epiphanes IV, that's the man I was trying to remember, really oppressed the Jews and defiled the rebuilt temple and tried to force them to become Greek in their outlook. And then the Romans, well, the Romans were very, very rough on the Jews. The Jewish uprisings were put down brutally. The people of Masada were the remnants of the Zealots went to Masada to try to hang out, and they built a ramp to get up there, and the last ones killed themselves rather than be taken prisoner by the Romans. The Romans enslaved those who they could. They expelled the remaining Jews from Judea. And then you had the Islamic caliphates as the 7th. Now, I'm not going to go into that, but if you read the Quran, you'll find out it really hates the Jews, really hates them, and wants to destroy them once and for all. And it's not so much that the Arabs feel that way, this is Satan. But again, I'm not going to say any more on that. But these are the 7 empires, as I see it, that are represented by the dragon that's pursuing the woman of Israel. And as for the fate of the woman with the starry crown, and exactly where the 10 lost tribes fled to, this is a huge subject. Accordingly, I'm going to leave discussion of this matter for another time. Suffice it to say that the 3.5-year period, 1,260 days, corresponds to the period of time that the beast will rule over the earth. You know that the name of the beast, the number of the beast, 666, and all of that. We're coming to that very soon. And this is, of course, prophesied in the next chapter, chapter 13, and will be the subject of the next video in this series. But I will talk more about the fate of Israel and the lost tribes in another lecture, which I think I've put on Rumble, and I'll do it as an ancillary lecture to these ones that I'm doing here. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening to me and for following along with this. Please do subscribe to this channel, and please comment and give it a like. Give this lecture a like, But subscribe and ring the little bell, because it all helps with the way that this channel gets advertised and presented. I've not asked you for any money, but I am hoping to set up the Invisible College, and I will in time, when I can work out exactly how to do it, set up, first of all, I'm going to set up the Invisible College, which will be free, and then I will also set up a Patreon link, so that if you wish to donate, you can set up a Patreon account there. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking again. Thank you.